And so Carlos Sainz has finally taken his first pole. No real surprise that it came in the wet. As I said many times on live streams and on other videos, this guy is really good in the wet. Great car control. That's his flair. That is what he does. Kind of surprising, really, that he's never really been super quick in the wet before. There have been a few issues, but here today, it kind of happened almost unexpectedly, because Carlos on that last lap, a lot of pressure obviously going into the last lap of Q3. The track was maybe drying, maybe not, nobody really knew, just heads down, get in the lap. Carlos didn't really know how quick the lap was going to be, but towards the end of the lap he did have a bit of a battery issue, just losing a little bit of power before he should have at the end of the lap, and probably that helped him, because coming out of Stowe it was very, very slippery. So we'd seen Max Verstappen on his opening lap in Q3 do a nice 360 there. He still did a 51.3 on that lap, by the way. And Carlos coming out of there didn't have quite as much power as normal, and then coming out of the club section didn't have quite as much power as possible. Not much he could do about it, but what that meant, of course, was that he couldn't really do any of the things that maybe Carlos Sainz might have done, which is one of those, or perhaps one of these, and lost it maybe under braking. He was just sort of pussyfooting it, and that in a way probably gave him the pole. Simultaneously, Charles Leclerc on his lap, he hadn't really made any mistakes in Q1 or Q2. He'd looked really good in FP3 as well, really good in FP3 in the dry this morning, and but he made a mistake coming out of Beckett's, ran wide, lost ground, and didn't get the lap in. So the Charles Leclerc mistake did appear under pressure in Q3. So that's possibly significant where we're going at Ferrari right now. Maybe all the pressure we've been talking about over the last couple of months on Charles Leclerc, on his side of the garage, because there's no doubt that politically Carlos Sainz is the slightly favoured driver there, not in terms of mechanical equipment, but certainly in terms of politics. And maybe for Charles it was like really trying and just made that one mistake. But it was enough to make him P3. Max Verstappen, meanwhile, quickest in Q1, quickest in Q2, had that spin on his first flying lap in Q3, and was purple when he had a yellow in Sector 2 on his last lap, and he crossed the line just a shade slower than Carlos, so he wouldn't have been in any way unhappy about that, other than the pole is a nice thing to have, but for sure it was there for the taking had that yellow not happened. So if you take into account Carlos's battery issue in the last couple of corners, Max Verstappen having the yellow, it kind of explains how it happened, although there's no doubt that with the confidence of taking his first pole, Carlos Sainz will potentially now become a different racing driver, and maybe thinking of the front and being more aggressive than we have seen him in the past in similar situations. So congratulations to him and to Ferrari, very, very good job, and to Red Bull, who've been really, really quick all weekend. Well, certainly today anyway. It took a while to get the car set up around the things that we talked about yesterday with Craig Scarborough, that Max Verstappen this morning, quite late out in FP3, it was dry, very, very windy though, and the track temperatures were cool. He came out after about 20 minutes, and by then Charles Leclerc, every time he'd gone out, he'd gone a little bit quicker, and he was P1, and Carlos Sainz was quick, and the two Mercedes were quick too. Max came out one lap, 0.4, 0.5 quicker than the rest. Really, really impressive to watch. Sergio Perez did a lap right at the end. It was going to be Lewis Hamilton, who was P4, having done a really good job for Mercedes all weekend, and the Mercedes looking pretty competitive in most dimensions of the Silverstone lap. But it was Sergio Perez that got in the lap right at the end there to finish P4. So Lewis P5. Lando Norris had looked good yesterday, looked good today in the McLaren, much, much quicker than Daniel Ricciardo when it really mattered under pressure and in the wet. So great job by Lando, P6. Fernando Alonso, for a while out there, looked really good. Didn't really get it together on the last lap, but P7 in the much revised Alpine, and looking very Fernando, very, very smooth, if that's the right word, given the jolt he does give the car even in the wet. But once he got that jolt over, he was just brilliant to watch. George Russell, a bit disappointing to be P8 in the other Mercedes. He'd looked very quick as well on occasion. Guan Yu Zhou 9 out-qualified Valtteri Bottas in Q2 to get into Q3, great job. And Nicholas Latifi, P10 for Williams. He didn't do a lap in Q3 to note, but made it through to Q3 with his teammate Alex Albon in the revised Williams with the much longer pods, not making it out of Q1. What does that tell us? Well, it probably tells us that the shape that Williams have got, which is not unlike that of Mercedes, which in Mercedes' case we know is defined around an unbelievable amount of downforce to the point where it's just given this incredible bouncing problem. Williams have gone the sort of Red Bull Aston Martin route of extending the pod, and it could well be now that they've got a more drivable car but less downforce. And when the rain came down, the high downforce car driven by Nicholas Latifi was the one with the grip, but Nicholas still had to go out and do the time. And as I've said several times also on these videos, you know, it's a shame that Latifi's never been able to really reproduce the speed that he's shown often and consistently in F2, but he did today. Let's just talk about FP3 now, because it was a dry session. We don't quite know what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, very changeable at Silverstone, but if it is dry, Red Bull look unbelievably good. I was watching at the BRDC Clubhouse complex this morning. You see them coming into view down the long straight, very high speed. You see the DRS just come into play. Then they go into this long left-hander, increasing radius. It's a corner that invites, if you like, turning in on the brakes. Everybody's just leaning on the right rear, just trying to get, it's really impressive how quick they are into that corner. Everybody seemed to be on soft tyres virtually throughout the session, even when they were doing fuel runs, because the temperatures were so cold. But then, of course, there is that very important section which is coming out of the left. There's a double apex right, if you like, which then leads onto the old pit straight. So it's really important to get a good exit from there, because that speed down that old pit straight is significant, and that, of course, goes into Copse Corner. So it was interesting to see the cars in action there, to see the drivers in action. Carlos Sainz, definitely a longer corner in terms of that right hand of that double apex right. He loves to be able to just get a little bit wide, look at an apex, and then get on the power, as we've always been saying. And he rides the car on the left rear. He's probably, I don't know, half a metre from a point where Charles Leclerc would be, who hugs the inside more, and he's able to get away with that, not because he's just steering the car into a tighter line, but because he can get the front to work there by the manipulation he's giving it with the throttle and the brakes and the steering simultaneously. So that's one area where Charles, all things being equal, on a dry track is actually using less road than Carlos Sainz. But Carlos is giving himself a little bit more margin, and of course he's flattering all the things that he does really well, which is get the power on, and then he's just away using his great balance and car control. But if you were to draw white paint around the lap under the car was to leave a trail, absolutely for sure Charles' lap of Silverstone would be slightly shorter than Carlos Sainz's. That's what showed up there. Max Verstappen, if Charles Leclerc is inside Carlos Sainz, then Max Verstappen is a few centimetres inside Charles Leclerc. Just incredible to watch. Through the left, he was just super quick. And then right mid-corner, he's giving the car a slight movement, so he's coming out absolutely straight. He's giving it massive acceleration for about half a second, and then braking into that right-hander, getting the car in really early, and just staying there with, again, perfect manipulation of the front just to get the grip that he needs. And again, it's not just him using a different line to everybody else, it is Max. That is the way he would drive any car around Silverstone. I'm convinced about that. Really impressive to watch. It was breathtaking to watch, actually, when he came and just did that one lap when everybody else was sort of had done their runs, and he just came out and just blew everybody away. It was really nice to see. Sergio Perez, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have said he's a lot different from Carlos Sainz there, other than that he's definitely not on the power as early as Carlos Sainz, and that's probably a good thing in terms of time management over the Grand Prix distance. He's going in a little bit wider, and you can just see that he's just sitting there waiting for the moment when he can do it. Really neat and tidy, but for one lap, not as quick as Sainz through there. Lewis Hamilton, twice he came into the left-hander much too quick. Well, I say much too quick, 4 or 5 kilometres an hour too quick, and it was very clear almost as he turned in that the car was carrying too much speed, as they say, and on both occasions he had to come out of the throttle, and he was running a little bit wide, and of course that messed him up for the next right, destroyed the lap indeed. So it was interesting to see him make more mistakes in that little cameo section of FP3 than, say, Charles or Max on that section. Possibly a function of how difficult the Mercedes is to drive. Almost certainly a function of how difficult the Mercedes is to drive. But on a lap when he was getting it right, and when the grip was right, and everything was as Lewis would want it, Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, you couldn't tell the difference. Absolutely fabulous through there. definitely a shorter corner as well than his teammate George Russell, who was precise. I mean, all I can say is George Russell, James Hunt at his peak. That's what it looked like to me today. Just incredibly linear, very, very clean, but slightly longer corners than Lewis, just asking slightly more of the car at the turn-in stage. But we're talking tiny, tiny details. Lando Norris, I was surprised actually how Lando didn't look as lean, if you like, as Max or Lewis. He was actually using quite a lot of road through that section. Very fluid, incredibly fluid, very, very confident in what he was doing, but using quite a lot of road. I think we've kind of seen that before, and I've remarked on that before, and it doesn't seem to have changed that much. He's just incredibly good, incredibly fluid, but you'd think when you see it and you look at Lewis, or you look at Max and you think, if Lando was doing what they're doing, he'd probably be even quicker. And I suspect that if you had Lando watching Max and Lewis and then watching himself, he would say the same thing. He'd say, oh wow, there's quite a big difference there. But I don't think they ever see those when they're sitting down in the car at track level. So I wasn't disappointed with Lando. It was just surprising to see that he was like that. Fernando, yeah, just no different at all. I mean, just unbelievably, I keep using this word smooth with Fernando, but he's just an incredibly smooth driver, other than as he goes into the left, it's boom, like that, but then the car is just incredibly beautifully balanced through all the corners. And in terms of where he's positioning the car going into the double apex right, the slow bit, he's definitely using quite a lot of road, sort of almost Carlos Sainz territory, but not in the same way. He's containing it more, and there's never a moment when he doesn't look as if he's driving with the front of the car rather than the rear. That's the difference. Fernando's driving with the front, but you can't really see it. I mean, I find him he's not frustrating, but he's an interesting driver, or fascinating driver to watch, because he's got this quite violent turn in, but then everything is just so, dare I say it again, smooth. And there was a time when you thought, wow, this guy has not lost anything. Just brilliant to watch. Anyway, there we are. It was great to have a wet session in some respects. I think you've got to feel sorry for the crowd at Silverstone. Terrible queues getting into the circuit so far on Friday and Saturday. And listening to the journalists, a lot of people talking, they're saying, the biggest crowd ever at Silverstone. I don't know, we have to be, either they got it wrong then in 1950 when the 150,000 people went to the British Grand Prix, or it was correct, I don't know, but I can't imagine they got more than 150,000 at Silverstone. Sometimes it feels like it with the traffic jams we got, but yeah, it's wet and it's windy and it's very British in that respect, and it could therefore be a race that is still wide open despite the formation of the grid and what we see there. Going to be fascinating, looking forward to that, so see you tomorrow.